Today we're finishing, no, we're not finishing actually. We'll get close to finishing. But 21.2, which is solving the equations by factoring. So we practiced factoring yesterday. Now we're going to do the solving portion. So yesterday we just came up with factors. Today we're actually going to solve. Example 2 now is going to ask us to solve. Okay, first question is 2x squared plus 7x minus 2 equals 4x squared plus 4. Okay, the first thing you want to do is you want to get the equation equal to 0. So right now there's some work on both sides of the equal sign. I want it to say equals 0. And it doesn't matter which side you bring everything to. So right now on the left-hand side there's 3 terms. On the right-hand side there's 2 terms. So I would say probably get rid of the 2 terms. It's just less work. But it really doesn't matter which side you move everything to. Okay, so I want to get rid of 4x squared. So I'm going to subtract 4x squareds. I'm going to put it underneath the other x squareds. I have no room there, but I'm going to put it right here. Minus 4x squareds. 2x squareds, take away 4x squareds is negative 2x squareds. I still have plus 7x minus 2 equals 4. Bless you. And now I'm still trying to get this to say equals 0, so get rid of your 4. So subtract 4 and then put it underneath the like term. So now I have negative 2x squareds plus 7x. Negative 2 minus 4 is negative 6. And now it says equals 0. Okay, from here, this is where you're going to see if there is a greatest common factor. And you also want to look for the a value needs to be positive. So we're going to look if there's any greatest common factor that we can pull out, or if it starts with a negative, we want to pull out that negative as well. So in my numbers 2, 7, and 6, there's no greatest common factor there. I mean, the greatest common factor is 1. So there's really no number I can pull out. But I also need to deal with the a because the a is negative. So to flip the symbol, we pull out a greatest common factor of negative 1. So we're actually pulling out negative 1 times all of that. That's going to make our negative 2 change to a positive. Negative 2 divided by negative 1 is positive 2. So I have positive 2x squareds. So all it's doing is flipping the rest of the symbols. 7x's divided by negative 1 is negative 7x's. And then negative 6 divided by negative 1 is positive 6. And it still equals 0. Okay, from here, this is what we were working on Monday. When I have a value in for a, so right now this is in ax squared plus bx plus c format. So to factor when it's in this format, right now I'm going to kind of cover up that negative 1 and the 0. Jet, will you shut the door for me, please? Thank you. So when it's in this format, this is where I'm looking for what multiplies to be the a times the c and what adds to be your b value. So a times c, 2 times 6. 2 times 6 is 12. So I want to know what multiplies to be 12, but what adds to be the b value, and the b is negative 7. Just be careful, it does have a negative with it. So what adds to be negative 7? 2 times 6 is 12, and then it has to add to be negative 7. So this is where you're just going to start thinking about all your things that multiply, your factors that multiply to be 12. Some of you can do this in your head. If you can't, just start listing what multiplies to be 12. Just start listing everything that can multiply to be 12. And then figure out which combination is going to get you to negative 7 when you add it. Okay, hopefully you realize at least it's something with a 3 and a 4, because 3 times 4 is 12. But when I add them, it needs to be negative. So if I put a negative on both of them, negative 3 times negative 4 is still positive 12, because a negative times a negative is positive. Negative 3 plus negative 4 is negative 7. So they multiply to be a positive 12, and they added to be negative 7. So that means I'm going to have negative 3x's, and I'm going to have negative 4x's for my next step. This is the step where I'm going to substitute this in for that middle term. Okay, so I still have my negative 1. And then this is where you write down the first and the last terms that are in that parentheses. So 2x squared, and then the positive 6 is at the back end. So you just brought down negative 1, you brought down 2x squared, you brought down 6. Okay, we're bringing down negative 7x, but we're going to write it as two terms. We're going to write negative 7x, but we're going to write it as negative 3x and negative 4x. I need to figure out which term to put where, though. One of those makes sense to be next to the 2, and one of those makes sense to be next to the 6. So looking at those two numbers, figure out which one makes sense to go with a 2 versus what makes sense to go with a 6. 2 and 3 would not make sense together, but 2 and 4 make sense, so let's put the negative 4x first. Because the 3 and the 6 being next to each other, those make sense. So put minus 3x second. Okay, now this is the part where we're factoring by grouping. So you're going to chunk the first two terms and then chunk the second two terms. Okay, looking at just those two terms, 2x squared minus 4x. Pull out the greatest common factor. What number can be divided into both? And do they share any letters? So the number 2 can go into both, and they also share an x. Okay, 2x squared divided by 2x. So 2 divided by 2 is 1. X squared divided by x is just x. I have one x left over. Bring down my minus sign. 4 divided by 2 is 2. X divided by x is just 1, so I'm gone with that. And you can double check, do distributive property. 2x times x is 2x squared. 2x times negative 2 is negative 4x. So if you're ever not sure if you did it correctly, do distributive property and make sure you ended up with what's on top. Okay, now do the second two terms. Remember, you want to end up with x minus 2 as your other parenthesis. So we're going to pull out negative 3. They don't share an x, so you can't pull an x out because the 6 doesn't have an x. Okay, they both can pull out a negative 3 though. Negative 3 divided by negative 3 is just 1, and I still have an x. 6 divided by negative 3 is negative 2. And remember, these two should be the same. And then the other thing that's left, the other two numbers, are going to make your other term. And then don't forget to bring down your minus 1. Okay, so these are, if the directions ask for your factors, here's your factors. Don't forget your -1 times, then we have 2x minus 3, and then we also have x minus 2. Okay, this is not what the answer is, but just these are the factors. There's 3 factors. Remember, they can be in any order. We need to solve. So to solve, that's when you make it equal to 0. Okay, take every term, or every factor, and make it equal to 0. So you're going to take the -1, make that equal to 0, 2x minus 3 equal to 0, and then x minus 2 equals 0. So -1 equals 0, 2x minus 3 equals 0, x minus 2 equals 0. And now we're solving these to figure out what x equals. Okay, the number -1 does not equal the number 0, so that doesn't make sense, so just cross that answer off. Okay, this one, just solve for x. Add 3 to both sides. Divide both sides by 2. X is 3 over 2. And then solve this one. Add 2 to both sides. X is positive 2. So this quadratic hits twice. It hits the x-axis. It has a 0 at 3/2 and a 0 at 2. Okay, look at your notes. Remember, next week, and then the week after that, and the week after that, I'm not here. When you go to take this test and you go to do the study guide, I'm not going to be here. So you have got to take good notes right now. If not, you're going to have to go back and rewatch all these videos. So notice that was one question, and it took us a whole page to do it. So when you do your work for me, when you do your study guide for me, and when you take the test for me, I'm going to expect a lot of work. If I don't see work, I'm going to assume you probably cheated. You either used the math app or you cheated off somebody else, because you're not doing this in your head. Okay, let's try another one. Does anyone need this still up? Okay. Okay, 2b, again, we're going to solve this. 3 times the quantity, x squared minus 1, equals -3x squared plus 2x plus 5. Okay, I need to make this equal to 0. First, I notice there's some distributive property. I need to solve that first. So take 3, multiply it by x squared, and then 3 times -1. So first, we have to finish doing the work. 3 times x squared is 3x squared. And then 3 times -1 is -3. And then just bring everything else down. Okay, we want this equation to say equal to 0. It doesn't matter which side you have the 0 on. This side would have 2 terms to get rid of. This side would have 3. So I'm going to get rid of the 2 terms just because it's less work. Okay, so I want to get rid of 3x squareds. So I'm going to subtract 3x squared. If I subtract it from one side, you have to do it to the other side, and I'm going to put it right underneath the other x squareds. So if I have 3x squareds and I take away 3x squareds, I'm just left with my -3 still. Some of you will get rid of your -3 during that step. That's fine. I'm going to do it as 2 separate steps because some people are going to get confused. If I have -3x squareds and then I have another -3x squareds, I now have -6x squareds. And then plus 2x plus 5. I still want this to say it equals 0. So instead of it being -3, I'm going to add 3. And then I'm going to put the plus 3 underneath the other constant, so put it underneath the 5. So it'll be right underneath the like term. So now this says 0 equals negative 6x squared plus 2x plus 8. Okay, I'm going to rewrite this with the equals 0 at the back end. So it's going to be negative 6x squared plus 2x plus 8, and then equals 0. So same thing as the 0 being in front. I'm just going to stick it on the back. Okay, first thing we do for factoring is we look for a greatest common factor. So pull out the GCF. Six, 2, and 8 are all even numbers, so definitely the number 2 can be pulled out. I also don't want a negative in front. So pull out the greatest common factor of negative 2, because that will get rid of your negative. And they also all share a 2. Okay, negative 6 divided by negative 2 is positive 3, so I'm going to have positive 3x squareds, because I want the a value to be positive. 2 divided by negative 2 is negative 1x. And then 8 divided by negative 2 is negative 4. I'm going to leave off the equals 0 for right now because I'm about to just do all my factoring. Okay, if you wanted to double check, you could do distributive property. Negative 2 times 3x squareds is negative 6x squareds. Negative 2 times negative 1x is 2x. Negative 2 times negative 4 is 8. Okay, now if I have so this is ax squared plus bx plus c. Okay, so for right now, ignore that negative 2 in front. We'll deal with that later. I want to factor what's in the parentheses. If there's a number in front, that's when we multiply to figure out what's a times c. 3 times negative 4. So it's going to multiply to be negative 12. But it's going to be adding to be the b value, and the b is negative 1. Okay, take a minute and figure out what two numbers multiply to be negative 12, but they add to be negative 1. Okay, hopefully you figured out it's a 3 and a 4. They have to multiply to be negative, though, so that means one of them has to be negative. When I add, they have to add to be negative 1. So put the negative on the bigger number, because 3 times negative 4 is negative 12. 3 plus negative 4 is negative 1. So that means I'm going to end up with a positive 3x, and I'm going to end up with a negative 4x. Okay, I'm going to bring down my negative 2. I'm going to bring down my 3x squared. I'm going to leave some space, and then I'll put the minus 4 down as well. Okay, figure out what makes sense to go with a 3 and what makes sense to go with the 4. So you have to write plus 3x and you have to write minus 4x. So the 3 and the 3 make sense to go next to each other, and the 4 and the 4 make sense. So put the 3 x's first, and then put the minus 4x. Okay, once you have 4 terms, now you can do the grouping. So group the first 2 terms together and then the second 2 terms. Okay, ignore that negative 2 in front for right now, and ignore the back 2. Pull out the greatest common factor. What number do they share? And do they share any letters? So you could pull out a 3, and you can pull out the letter x. So 3x squared, if I pulled out, I divide by 3 and I divide by x, I still have an x left over. 3x divided by 3x is just 1. And then if you did distributive property, 3x times x is 3x squared. 3x times 1 is 3x. So you're doing like backwards distributive property. Okay, go ahead and do the second two terms then. Figure what are you going to pull out of both of them. You want to end up with x plus 1, hopefully, in parentheses. So we're going to pull out a minus 4. If I pull out negative 4, I'm left with x. Negative 4 divided by negative 4 is positive 1, so plus 1. These two have to be the same. If they're not the same, you did something wrong, and you need to erase that whole section and start over and figure out what happened. Okay, so now list out your factors. We'll have negative 2 still, because that negative 2 is in front, so just remember to bring it down. Then the 3x minus 4. And also the one that got repeated, that factor, x plus 1. Those are your factors. And again, it can be in any order. You don't have to have it in this order. If you want to put x plus 1 first, that's okay. Now we're solving, so make it equal to 0. So there's 3 factors. Negative 2 equals 0, which that doesn't make sense. 3x minus 4 equals 0. And then x plus 1 equals 0. Okay, from here, just solve for x. So look at the side that has the x, get rid of minus 4. And then get rid of dividing, or multiplying by 3, divide by 3. So I get x is 4/3. Leave it as a fraction. If you give me a decimal, you're going to end up having to round. And if I don't ask you to round and you round, I'm going to mark it wrong. So if you write 1.3, I would mark that wrong, because 4/3 is not 1.3. And then subtract 1 from both sides, and x is negative 1. So this quadratic had 2 solutions, 4/3 and then negative 1. Is question number 2, and I want you to solve. 12x squared plus 48x plus 45 equals 0. Okay, first step, find the greatest common factor. So figure out what number you can pull out of all of those. Was 3. You should have pulled out a 3. Okay, go ahead and finish that if you have not yet. If I pull out a greatest common factor of 3, what am I left with? Okay, 12 divided by 3 is 4, so you have 4x squareds. 48 divided by 3 is 16, so you have 16 x's. And 45 divided by 3 is 15. Okay, now from here, this is where you figure out what multiplies to be a times c and what adds to be your b value. Okay, go ahead and figure out what multiplies to be your a times your c and what adds to be the b value. See, that's 4 times 15, so you're seeing what multiplies to be 60 and what adds to be 16. So if you have not figured that out, go ahead and figure out what multiplies to be 60 and adds to be 16. 10 x's and we're going to have 6 x's. Okay, bring down the 3. Bring down 4x squared. Leave some space and then put the 15 at the end. Okay, determine which one you want to go first, 10x or 6x. I'm going to put the 10 first. You don't have to do it this way. You can flip it and you'll still end up with the same answer at the end. Okay, now chunk 2 and 2 together. Go ahead and figure out what's the greatest common factor of each of those 2 chunks, or your 2 chunks. If you flipped these, you'll still end up with the same answer at the end. Have your factors should be 3, a 2x plus 3, and then a 2x plus 5. And it does not have to be in that order. Okay, the last step we have to do is now actually solve this. So set it equal to 0. Go ahead and find what x equals. Okay, you should end up with your solutions are -3/2 and -5/2, or -1.5 and -2.5. Questions so far? Okay, now we're going to do word problems. Dun, dun, dun. You'll be okay, I promise. You're going to want to take good notes, though. This is written the projectile motion formula. Is h equals -16t² plus vt plus s. We're going to use this equation all the time when we're doing word problems. Okay, your h stands for the ending height. T and this T also stand for your time. Usually it's in seconds. V stands for velocity. You guys have done this in physics in 8th grade. Velocity is how fast it's going. And then the S at the end is the starting height. So you're going to have word problems, and you have to fill in some of the numbers. So if it asks for the ending height, if it asks for how long it's going to take for time, if it gives you the velocity, how fast something's going, and then where it started at. Okay, this is example 3A, and it says to solve. When a baseball player hits a baseball into the air, the height of the ball at t seconds after the ball is hit can be modeled with the projectile motion formula. If the ball is hit at 3 feet off the ground with an upward velocity of 47 feet per second, how long will it take for the ball to hit the ground, assuming it's not caught? Okay, so we're going to write down the important information from that word problem. The ball is originally hit at 3 feet off the ground. Because the pitcher is pitching the ball, and when he hits it with the bat, the ball is 3 feet in the air. It tells me that the velocity, so how hard it's being hit, the velocity is 47 feet per second. That ball is flying 47 feet every second. And then it asks, when will it hit the ground? So assuming nobody catches it, that's asking, so when will it equal 0 feet? When will it get to the ground? So it'll be at 0 feet is what it's really asking. Okay, we're going to take that equation, h equals -16 t² plus vt plus s, and we're going to substitute in the numbers that we already know. Okay, the ball is hit at 3 feet off the ground, so the original starting height of the ball, the starting height is the s, so put the 3 in for the s. The velocity is 47 feet per second, so underneath the v, put 47. I want to know when it's going to hit the ground, so I want to know when that ending height will be 0. And it's saying, when will it? So I want to know how many seconds. So that's what I'm trying to figure out is what t stands for. I'm going to change t, though, to be x, just because I prefer x over t. So negative 16x squared and then 47x. Sometimes t ends up looking like a plus sign, so I like to just change the t to the x. So here's our equation. Okay, ignore the equals 0 for right now. So just looking at this, we're going to solve it, solve for x. So first think if there's any number that can be divided into all of them. So I would go with 3, see if 3 can go into 47. 47 divided by 3, no, that does not work. So there's no greatest common factor. But I don't want a negative in front. So to pull out that negative, we're going to make the greatest common factor negative 1. So if I pull out a negative, I'm left with positive 16x squared minus 47x and then minus 3. So if you pull out a negative, if you divide everything by negative 1, it just flips all the symbols. Okay, now I want to factor what's in the parentheses. So this is ax squared plus bx plus c. I want to figure out what multiplies and then what adds. So it's what multiplies to be a times c. 16 times negative 3. So it's going to be what multiplies to be negative 48. 16 times negative 3 is negative 48. And what adds to be the b value, which is negative 47. Okay, thinking of two numbers that multiply to be negative 48, but they add to be negative 47. So hopefully you realize that's going to be 48 and 1. When they multiply, I need it to be negative. So that means one of those numbers needs to be negative. And when I add them, I need to add to a negative. So put the negative on the bigger number. So it's going to be negative 48 and positive 1. So that means the two terms I'm about to have are negative 48x's and positive 1x. Okay, we're going to rewrite this line, and we're going to make it have 4 terms there. So we're going to have negative 1 out front still. We'll have the first term. Leave some space for 2 terms there, and then put your minus 3 at the end. Okay, we need to determine if the 48 makes sense to go with the 16 or the 3. So let's see if 48 and 16, let's see if 48 is divisible by 16. 48 divided by 16, that does work. So put the 48 with the 16. So minus 48x's plus 1x. Now we do our grouping. Okay, so ignore your negative 1, ignore what's in the back. I just told you that the number 16 can go into both of those. Also, they both share a letter. They both share the letter X. (16x times x) will get me 16x squared. Okay, negative 48 divided by 16 is 3, so that'll be a negative 3 because the x was already pulled out. If you did distributive property, 16x times x is 16x squared. 16x times negative 3 is negative 48x. Okay, now do this part. I want to end up with x minus 3, so just pull out a positive 1 because we still end up with x minus 3. 1 times x is 1x. 1 times negative 3 is negative 3. Okay, we still have the negative 1 in front. Okay, write out the factors. There's 3 factors here. Negative 1 times 16x plus 1 times x minus 3. And we still need to solve, so make it equal to 0. So take each factor and make it equal to 0. Okay, -1 does not equal 0. Solve this, so subtract 1. I end up with x equals -1/16. Remember the question's talking about hitting a ball, and when is it going to hit the ground? If the batter hits it, it's not going to hit at -1/16 of a second. That doesn't make sense for it to be negative time, so cross that answer off. X equals 3, that means it'll take 3 seconds for the ball, once it's been hit, to land if nobody catches it. So with the word problems, just make sure your answers make sense. Okay, look at your notes. Some of you right now are busy coloring. Some of you have been sitting there just doodling. Some of you have been in la-la land. You only have me for 3 more days. Then when you get to your study guide and you get to your test, I'm not here for you. You have to take good notes. You guys don't talk to each other as well. You have got to start talking to the people around you if you don't know what you're doing and if I'm not here. Yeah. So tomorrow we'll finish. We have 2 more word problems tomorrow. But you really need to go back through your notes right now if you think so. And what did you miss? What do you need to clean up? Because I'll be gone.